Great. Well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jonathan Friedman and I work at PEN America, the literary and free expression nonprofit. We are celebrating our 100th year in existence, which is exciting. So exciting to think about things that live to be 100. We take that as a source of pride. I am so delighted to be here this morning to speak with these three author illustrators about their books and about the moment that we are living through in the United States, a moment where book banning and censorship is not only kind of all over the place, it is on the rise with increasing intensity. And I want to say a little bit before I introduce the panelists just about what I have been watching for the past 2 years. It was in early 2021 when I first got notified by a number of authors that something strange and new was happening in a school district in Texas. There was a list of about 120 books in one school district, and people were coming to school board meetings really angry about these books. The school district during COVID had adopted a new curriculum where students in every grade of the high school were going to be able to take these reading clubs and read books that they wanted. The teachers and local curriculum makers had produced this list of 120 books that was full of options. They had one unit that was just graphic novels. They had units on different themes, and it was all these contemporary books. And the point was to, create a curriculum that responded to students' interests and presented a kind of diversity of materials and topics to the students. And very soon after it was adopted, suddenly, locally, the pushback was really severe. And it just sort of snowballed from there. And then within a few months, we started speaking about what was going on in Leander, Texas. Then suddenly copycat movements started appearing all over the country. You have someone else going to school board in Texas to complain about the content of one page on one particular book. And then suddenly similar things were happening in Florida, Virginia, and Utah, and Tennessee, and many other places. And since then, it's really just been more of the same, with lists of books that people want to challenge getting longer and longer, with the tactics of what's going on at school board meetings getting more and more intense. A frequent tactic is to go to a school board meeting with a book and say, okay, are there any minors in the room? Please leave, because now I have to read this salacious material that I find deeply offensive and no one should ever hear aloud for a room of people. And the principle that some of these people seem to want to make the new norm is that if you feel uncomfortable reading something aloud, then it should not exist in a book and no one should be able to read it ever. Without any attention to the fact that obviously many topics are awkward to read aloud in many different rooms, and many people would have different standards of what they feel comfortable reading aloud. But that's how all of this is meant to chill and make people think twice. So while that has increased in many school boards around the country, something else has started to happen as well. And this started a year ago with politicians in different parts, particularly at first one in Texas, but very soon many in Wisconsin, Florida, and other places, also deciding that the new political issue that they are going to care about the most is books in schools, books in their local schools. So you've had politicians send letters, say that they need to start inquiries into how a book got on a shelf in a particular school district, using basically their political office to, in a sense, intimidate or pressure school districts to remove books. One politician in Texas in 2021 created a list of 850 or so odd books and sent it to every school district in Texas and said he wanted to know how the books got there, how many books were there, what had been spent on these books, essentially like a fishing expedition for information about books and to make everybody think twice about these titles. And the list, it was very clear, had been essentially sourced what seemed from like a keyword search, like going in a library database and typing in, racism, black, gay, queer, transgender, and then everything that came up, just throwing it on a list and saying, okay, all this is bad. And so it's not surprising that then the books that have been being removed from schools very clearly hit those topics. In our research at Penn, we found in the last school year that overwhelmingly the books that are being targeted are books that are written by Black or LGBTQ authors and about the same kinds of topics: gender, sexuality, racism, but also books about like suicide, grief, sexual abuse, and so many topics that people find, maybe personally difficult or taboo to talk about, but that have been put in schools or written by authors because they didn't used to exist. And I like to say to audiences, when they're surprised to think about all this book banning, I say, well, if anybody's over 25, can you remember ever reading about a gay character in any book in a school, ever? And a lot of times, most rooms in this country cannot. And so part of how I think of what we're living through right now is really a backlash to really an era, maybe a decade, where freedom of expression, particularly in books and in comics and other forms, really exploded and was like open and free for the first time. And so I think a lot of times some of the national language around freedom of speech and who gets to be heard and who's being silenced, all that gets twisted one way, but we really have to recognize that there was a lot of freedom, and now this is an effort to kind of push that freedom back out of schools, to chill authors and illustrators in their work as well. And so I said, if that was phase one, right now we are living through phase two, and phase two is more and more government intervention. So why just have one parent, be able to remove a book, challenge a book in a school district, when you could make a law that all school districts in the state have to remove that book? Or make a committee in Tennessee that will decide what books are allowed in every part of Tennessee. Any book that's been banned in any part will soon be banned in the entire state. And so it's a way of centralizing power, consolidating, essentially making banning more akin to like the powers that we give to police or any kind of centralized body than local school districts. And you hear a lot of this rhetoric, well, we're just concerned parents and we just want to remove books in our schools, in our school libraries, in our classrooms. You can get the book on Amazon, you can get the book at the public library, but I will caution any of you who see that rhetoric to recognize that already the same movement is coming after public libraries too. I now almost every week get told about some public library where books are being challenged or removed. There was a public library in Louisiana that removed close to 80 books from the shelves, from a public library, adult books. And that seems pretty wild, isn't it? And so I think we should not be fooled into thinking that this movement, the feeling behind it, is one that sees the schools as the ultimate goal, because it is the same movement that is pushing a little bit into public libraries. It's the same movement that probably wants to stop bookstores from selling things. It's the same movement that has suggested libraries should basically have carded entry for your ID, and anything above essentially a 5th grade level should essentially be in like a glass room, and you're only allowed in at certain times when no one's looking, like back rooms, illicitly looking at books. And so it's this effort, I think, of increasingly to treat books like controlled substances. And maybe, from a more, concerned parent perspective, that makes a lot of sense. We protect our children from X, we should protect them from Y, etc. But what's critical is that we recognize, all of us as citizens of the United States, that is a tactic that is one that historically this country has stood against, and something that we have denounced when it is done by authoritarian countries around the world. And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of a blind spot, for lack of a word, where we are perhaps a little naive to really see the intensity behind this and how quickly things could change. I will say also that in part of this effort around the country, there have been ideas about putting new rating systems on books that would be different from movies. With movies, a PG-13 movie, you can go see it, it's like a recommendation. Most parents would take a 10-year-old to see a PG-13 movie, etc. But these would be much more significant restrictions. And in some cases, they've even proposed that the FCC develop a new category, for categorizing television shows with any LGBTQ content, so that parents could essentially keep it away from their children entirely. So a lot of this is being driven by a very particular ideological view of society, a very vocal minority, but somehow a minority that has essentially increasingly been given an opportunity to be heard by people in political power. And that is a movement and an effort and a campaign that we don't really feel very much here in New York City, but I can tell you for many people around the country right now, feels like how they imagine what it might have been like to live through McCarthyism. Now, I specialize in doom and gloom because I watch this every day, but I do want to leave you all and make sure that we talk about the hope, which is that people are getting more organized, they are fighting this. You can join our work, you can go to breakaways.org/action and get involved and learn about what we're doing. And you can hear from authors and illustrators who are taking a stand and trying to work with us to raise public awareness around the country. And so that's my source of hope, and that's why I'm thrilled for today's conversation. So, really pleased to be joined to my immediate left by Mike Curato. Mike is the author and illustrator of graphic novels and children's books and uses he, him pronouns, as well as Maia Kobabe. Maia is the author, illustrator of Genderqueer, which is Genderqueer, a memoir, which is probably the most banned book in the country, and as well as many short comics, which have been published in the Nib, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, and many print anthologies. Maia is non-binary, queer, trans, and uses air pronouns. And finally, Cathy Johnson. Cathy is the author of The Breakaways, one of the first children's books that I noticed was being banned and really caught me by surprise, or maybe a year and a half ago. Cathy is a cartoonist, printmaker, educator, and uses she, her, and they. So we're thrilled to have all three of you here. So what's brought us together is, of course, the targeting of your books. So I thought I would start with the more
Also, we're just all cool.
Yeah, well, that too. So I thought we should talk about first, to really set the record straight. Why did you write these books? What was your intention? Maybe we'll go across from here.
Yeah, I wrote Flamer because I didn't have a book like this when I was 14. I was a chubby Filipino white mixed kid who was trying to figure things out. Who did I have to look to in media to let me know, you know what, you're okay, you're supposed to be here, and when we don't see ourselves reflected in books and TV and film, when we don't see ourselves in government or places of leadership, we start to wonder if we're supposed to be here. So my book deals with a lot of self-hatred and toxic masculinity and suicidal ideation. Things I really could have used when I was 14.
Yeah, I wrote my book because I really wanted to come out as non-binary and start talking about pronouns to my family, my parents, my comics community, and I was having a really hard time opening that conversation or figuring out what to say in conversation or feeling like I could get my full point across. And I'm a cartoonist. That's the media that I feel the most sort of eloquent and it's what I have a master's degree in. And so finally, at some point, I sat down and was like, I think I really need to write about this because I think I cannot articulate everything I'm trying to say, and I think I need to sit down with a pencil and paper and really figure out exactly what I'm wanting to communicate to get it all out, to be seen.
That's where going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. I made my graphic novel, The Breakaways. I don't have a copy of it. You just have to imagine it. It looks good. Imagine a really cool looking book.
Yeah.
I made it because I was a teacher of middle schoolers, and I just really wanted to make all my comics up to that point had been for adult audiences. And I would tell my students, oh, I make comic books. And they'd be like, can we see it? And I'd have to be like, no. So I really wanted to make a book that was specifically for my students and specifically for middle schoolers. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. And now each of you, had these intentions, and nonetheless they've been received and twisted in various ways. We were talking earlier, Mike and I, about just the lies that are told about Flamer. But so can we talk a little bit about what that has been like to see your art, something that you produced with a certain intention in the world, be received in this way?
I mean, honestly, it has made me physically ill at times. I was a kid of the 90s, right? So I grew up with a lot of homophobia, blatant homophobia, just in your face every day, at school, and then also on the news and in TV, and there's the AIDS crisis, and so being gay was not only is everyone going to hate you, but you're going to die, right? That was my childhood. Great, I have so much to look forward to. And So seeing this play out, seeing like someone take my work and twist around it, it feels like really like regressive. It's like like sometimes I feel like I'm that little kid again, and I have to remember like, no, I'm a grown up, I have agency, and these are lies. Like I just have to remind myself. And I think that's one of the core issues here is like, because our books are truthful, because we talk about things that weren't allowed to be talked about when we were kids, that people are like, no, we can't, don't turn our kids gay, and it's like, oh my God. They're just always going to be gay, whether they're gay or
already.
Queer, or they're already like that. If I could make everyone gay, I would, and yet I can't. Sorry, I can go on about this, so I'm going to pass it along here.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird because my book is a memoir, so it's about my actual life. So when people are like, this book is pornographic, I'm like, buddy, I'm asexual. Like, have you read it? Like, it's just very weird. And it's frustrating because so many people who do challenge my book openly say, I haven't read the book, but I think it should not be available in schools. And I will get, negative messages that are, claiming things like, you're trying to do this or that, or you're trying to say this or that. And I'm like, that's like completely not what I'm saying at all. And like, you can just lie, I guess. But it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. It's stressful. It wastes a lot of my time. But like if there are any silver linings, it's that I've been able to connect with a lot of other authors who are going through similar things, and I've had a lot of other authors who've also had their books banned and challenged reach out to me, and I feel very in community with a lot of other authors facing this, and I'm very grateful for organizations like PEN and the National Coalition Against Censorship and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, who have all really stepped up for me. So it's it really sucks, but I definitely don't feel like I'm facing it alone. So at least that's something. How's it been for you, Cathy?
I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said on this end. I can't remember.
Oh, what is it like?
I can't remember the question.
The experience of having your book challenged. Because again, you wrote it for your students. You wrote it as this middle grade book that would be accessible, and then people are saying, oh, this shouldn't be allowed in schools.
Yeah, it's very strange. I feel like whenever I get emails or newscasters try to talk to me, I feel like they clearly have not read the book.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like it's all made up. It's not real. I'm so sorry.
No, well, what's in reading all three of your books, I mean, Maya, your books do have, I think, more sexual content than Breakaways.
Ours are both more YA, and Breakaways is fully a middle grade.
What is in the Breakaways that people object to?
There's a kiss.
There's a kiss.
Yeah.
How dare.
There's a kiss. And there's queer middle schoolers finding friendship and community.
Thanks. Yeah, so it's a
and they play
book.
soccer.
And the thing is that I'm an educator, so I understand sort of the idea of growth and what would be appropriate to a middle school age versus a young adult versus elementary and stuff like that. And so it's a book with 15 main characters who all have a different spectrum of identity, different social class, different... I just wanted to be able to represent as much diversity as I could because I was making it for real children. So I wanted to be able to represent real children. But I also think when it came out, there weren't a lot of middle school books that even acknowledged that gay people exist or trans people exist. And so it kind of got shoved with, Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me. It kept being shoved with YA queer books. And so I think there's a misunderstanding of it as a middle school book. Yeah. Because when people, PEN America, you just published on Trans Day of Visibility on Friday, that this book is a trans narrative. And I'm there is a trans character, and he's on 3 pages.
It's enough to get it,
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it's enough. There's also, this is my favorite, can we talk about why they're banned? This is my favorite one. My favorite one was it being accused of encouraging children to commit violence against the police, which is like an amazing accusation to have.
It's the soccer balls?
The soccer ball, I know. It's because towards the end of the book,
I know. Yeah.
there's a poster.
Yeah.
There's a band. There's band posters all. There's like many band posters, and one of the bands is called Bleed the Pigs, which is a great band, and you should listen to them. So it's just called Bleed the Pigs, like this band poster on the wall.
Yeah, and it's like these punk kids are having like a little house.
Yeah, they're having
show,
like a house show.
and it's literally maybe like 1 by 1 inch in one panel on like one page.
And that means that I'm encouraging children to commit violent acts against the police.
I know if I were 10,
that's what I would have taken. As a young reader, I would have taken. I actually probably as a vegetarian, I would have been like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, I know.
I do think one thing that struck me though in the Breakaways in particular is it is, like you said, it's just on 3 pages. Like it's so matter of fact, right? Like it's so. I don't know a book with 15 main characters where, you know, there are themes of queerness in the book, but they're not really what the story's about per se. Like they're sort of there, but they're not there as it's not necessarily right like a queer book per se.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, so much vilification just for even acknowledging existence.
Yeah, it's like my book is about gender, and like this book is about sexuality, and your book is about friendship and teamwork.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, there is actually nothing more punk than that, but you know.
And my book is about sexuality, and the amount of sexual situations in the book amount to like 4 pages.
Yeah.
And there's no like real interaction of sexual experience. Like there's, I mean, I'm just gonna say it because
Spoilers.
I'm not in an elementary school classroom right now. There's like a teen circle jerk in like a tent, and it's all like inferred. You don't see like peen and whatever, but things are like discussed and whatever. And the main character, the gay kid, is like like doesn't realize what's going on, and then when he realizes what's happening, he's like, I have to get out of here. He's the one that's like, I can't be here. He's not ready. He doesn't feel safe. And this is something that happened to me as a teenager. I was like, I can't get in on this because they'll figure something out, and I don't know what's gonna happen. They'll murder me. And I like laughed. I was just like, straight boys are like the gayest people in the world. I'm like, you do like nasty stuff that like I was clutching my pearls when I was gay in the closet. So anyway, you know, and yes, at a certain point he like finds a quiet place to like take care of something on his own, and it's all very like inferred. He talks about, there's one page where he's like, yeah, I figured out what masturbation was by accident one day. Like, and so it's like, it's shocking. Like I'm ruining. This book is somehow like deflowering their children. I'm like, listen, if you have a 14-year-old in your home, like, they don't need my book to figure that out, okay? Yeah. They have like hands.
And the whole internet.
Yeah, I'm like, seriously, I'm like, what is on the phone? Like, there's so much that they can access now without books.
And
that's actual pornography.
And I think what we're talking about is like proper, I'm such an educator. I'm calling out Liam. Hi, Liam. He's my coworker. Is like proper scaffolding of subjects, right?
Yeah.
In middle school, it's proper to be like, there are gay people, there are trans people, and in teenhood is when you start to have sexual education, you start to have health education, and it's important in order to have well-rounded adults who can handle the world, right? Is to be able to scaffold important information, and so you can build upon knowledge, right? And so that's the scaffolding. It is age appropriate,
right?
To be, there are sexual situations, and you can take personal control over yourself, right? And remove yourself or something like that. Like, that's important to be able to build upon this knowledge. And so that's why it's really problematic when they remove these books.
Yeah.
We're gonna end up with very poorly developed adults.
I mean, we have them now. Like, that's why we are where we are. Because they perpetuate this culture of shame, right? Where it's like, we're not allowed to talk about sexuality as children. and then we get to adulthood and we fumble around and like F things up royally, and don't know how to like educate our own youth so they don't have such a rough go at it. Yeah, we just got to go around on this carousel.
It's also like, in my opinion, like a book is just about like the safest way that you can encounter any kind of challenging material, whether that is like the history of racism in America, or conversations around suicide ideation or grief, as you mentioned, or like other topics that have been hit are like sex ed and like pregnancy prevention, and like even things like student rights sometimes are like challenged. And it's like these are topics that are like very important for young people to learn about, and that I think a book is often the very best place to learn them, because the books generally are like researched, edited, fact-checked to a certain extent, and like many of these topics, like I as a young person, like I think it's like if I read them in a book, that was in many ways like I think better and safer and a gentler way than maybe even like just reading it about on the internet, or even seeing it in like a movie where there's also like the visual like images. Like a book that you can read at your own pace, you can set it down if you need to, you can take breaks, you can sort of process it, and like I would much rather have young people and like encounter these maybe like new or challenging topics through reading. Like that's how I think young people should be educated about these topics. Like it's the best way.
Are they reading, Cathy? I mean, that's the thing for me a lot of times. Like these books get so blown out of proportion, and it's like one person took the book out because the kids don't use the library. I mean, isn't that your experience?
Kids don't use the library.
No, like the goal of encouraging literacy, right, and making stories people want to read. I mean, one of the things a lot of English teachers tell me when it's curriculum getting challenged, they're like, well, the reason why we read that book as a class is because it might have that topic that some people find uncomfortable, but actually young people want to talk about this, and it helps them learn to read because it's an interesting story. They don't want to read the most anodyne, boring things that have no connection to their lives.
To their real lives. Or also there might be topics like you never know what kid has already experienced something, from grief to violence to a sexual experience in their life, and maybe doesn't know how to ask about it, doesn't know how to bring it up, doesn't know how to even ask a parent or an adult, like, is this normal, or am I, I'm the only one who's ever experienced this. Like, and then if you see it in a book, it also just give you the language to then like understand your own experience and process it, and maybe ask for help about it if you need it.
And something that I think is important in my book, there's a scene where, spoiler alert, I'm so sorry. There's a scene where a girl comes out and says, I like girls, right? She says that to the main character, and it was really important for me I have my main character, and she says, I don't know. I don't know who I like. She's 10 years old. She doesn't know. Like, I wanted to be able to represent, you don't have to know. You don't have to know at this age, right? So, like, I wanted to represent someone who doesn't know, because we're not trying to force anyone to come out or do anything like that. And that was something that was important to me to acknowledge, that it's okay to not know.
And genderqueer in particular, it is autobiographical in that sense, that there isn't a moment of knowing. There's sort of like a trend. There's like this journey of knowing, right, and trying out different things. I think that is probably such a common experience, but I don't know where that's been reflected in a book before.
It takes a long time. It takes a long time to figure out who you are.
And I just want to add also, I feel like there's this misconception by parents of like, oh my God, if my child maybe figures out that they're queer or figures out their sexuality, that they're suddenly going to act on it. That suddenly it's like, well, I know I like boys, so now it's time to like, it's like, whoa, no, like, I think queer folks have weird sexpectations by like hetero folks, like they like assume that we're into all manner of things, and it's like, that's really not the case. Like, why is it different?
Well, it's like when you cast anything that is LGBTQ as explicit, rather than just being like, it can also, it's just like any other type of range of human experience, where like it can be super boring actually and neutral, to very extravagant and wild and joyful, and like, it can be all manner of range of things. But because they're trying to shift anything from one kiss to like one coming out scene to even like two people like holding hands and admitting they like each other, like saying, oh, this is not appropriate for young people, like pushing that into this sort of explicit category, it is like, you're trying to like paint the entire experience of being a queer person as not appropriate for children and not appropriate for the classroom. And like that That's so frustrating. And it's very intentional, like what they're trying to like twist the language to say this.
In Florida, we have a situation in Florida where it's like inappropriate to have same-sex parents and talk about it in schools now. So there was this moment where that was okay, and now it's been made illegal. And so if you are yourself a queer teacher and you're married or you have a partner or you have a kid in the class, it's like you can't talk about
your own family.
Your family isn't appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Your very identity. So problematic feels like a nice way of describing the situation. I think I know at least a few of your books had a bit of runway before they started being targeted, right? There's this moment where suddenly people were mad, but until that point, and maybe even since, there's been positive reaction.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear from each of you, how have young people reacted to your books?
Do you want to start, Cathy?
Oh.
Yeah, have you heard from,
You got the
did you have your
question
students
fresh.
read your book?
Yeah, they've read the book.
Did they
What'd
like
they
it?
say?
Well, they like my favorite one is when they're shy. They're like a fan, and then they're in my class and they're like shy. It's really cute. And I'm like, no, I'm just a person. I don't know. Like, what have they said to me?
Yeah.
No, well, they're middle schoolers, so they're trying to be cool. So they'll be like, I liked your book. Like, they're not like giving me expounded, They're like, and I'm like, my favorite one was like this girl. We kind of had a fight, and then the next day she's like, I went to the library, I read your book, and I was like, oh, did you? What'd you think? She was like, I liked it. And I was like, what was your favorite part? And she was like, the kiss. And that's the thing, it's like the kiss. And I'm like, kisses are fun. They're cute. I'm not expecting her to go off and kiss.
Yeah.
But that's why you read it in a book. It's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was like Genderqueer came out in May of 2019. And the first time I heard about a challenge wasn't until like October of 2021, so like 2.5 years before it was challenged, before that I'd heard about it being challenged. And through the whole first couple of years, the responses were so sweet. They were so lovely. It was very well supported by librarians. It won a couple awards from the American Library Association. A lot of librarians would come to events I was at and buy it and be like, I am so excited to have this in my library, and I know exactly like the teen that I'm going to give it to. Like they'd have like one queer teen in mind who like haunted the shelves and like, I'm going to give it to that reader. And it was so cool that they would be like, I know exactly the reader for this book. And I think maybe because my readers tend to be older, they're like maybe late teens to like 20s, or sometimes see people in their 30s, 40s, etc., all the way up. I do a lot of Instagram DMs to people saying like, I just read your book in one sitting and I loved it so much and I related to this part, or like, this part is exactly like my childhood. And all people, anytime we have any kind of overlapping agenda, they'll be like, I also grew up in Northern California, or like, I was also at Waldorf School, or like, whatever it is. So yeah, I've had so many like lovely responses, and even now with the challenges and the bans, and I do get a certain amount of like hate mail, but like the like I guess lovely mail, the warm-hearted mail still outnumbers the hate mail, somewhere between like 2-to-1 to like 10-to-1, depending on kind of the week. So like I still am feeling like way more supported than I am attacked, at least on like individual messages that are reaching my inbox.
Yeah, it was a little over a year before Flamer got any challenges. It came out in September 2020, amidst lockdown. Great time for a book to come out.
We did.
Yeah.
Couldn't call that one.
But yeah, it was all gravy for like a year, just like really supportive comments, also won some awards. And I was hearing from all age groups, like young folks who, maybe were still closeted, being like, I really relate to this book, I'm really happy that I have it, or like people that were out but like only had straight friends or something, and it's like, oh yeah, I need this, people who haven't found their community yet, like that's why I made it, right? It's like a life raft for folks. And then I'm hearing from people like my age, I'm in my 40s, and they're like, wow, I've never read a book that was like completely my experience, and that I think the adults are like very emotional about it, and there were actually like two folks, I was telling you this earlier, who were both Filipino, chubby, Catholic altar servers, Boy Scouts. Like, the whole, they're like, why are you in my head?
Yeah,
Are-
people. I've
are
had
we
people.
the same person?
I've had people
actually?
say like, "Did
And-
you read my diary to write
Yeah,
this book?" Like they
exactly.
feel like it's so related to their own experience.
Yeah, and so the thing that gags me is like, I was this 14-year-old thinking I was like a freak. There was no one else like me in the world, and here I am all alone. Like, what am I going to do? But it's like there were so many of us, and we were just like disconnected, and we had no way to be connected. And like through, you know, things like books, we can find a connection and just know like, okay, I don't know someone in person, but they're out there, and I can find them someday.
Yeah.
I think one of the most, the thing I get told all the time by particularly YA authors, and people who've made graphic novels in particular is, you know, they made a book that they wished they could have read when they were younger, and then they put it in schools, you know, got in schools, and then you had young people who said, oh, there's nothing like this, I really want to read it. And then now we've had this sort of like this, like, you know, force intervening in between that in a really disturbing way. And like the truth is, particularly when it comes to queer topics, LGBTQ representation, you know, first, there's a long history of censorship, right, of these topics. And there's this sort of idea that I sort of encounter a lot, like, this must be all over schools, right? Like, schools must be like the gayest places on earth now in 2023. And I just don't think that's very realistic. I think, you know, my sense is like, for example, you were talking about sex ed. In many ways, like, these books are the only sex ed, to a certain extent, that a lot of young people will get that touches on, actually, if they're LGBTQ, their lives, because they don't learn about that in school at all, right?
I think it has very much to do with like where you live and your income bracket and what your school district, what resources it has. I mean, yeah, I'm assuming it's a pretty low percentage of schools that actually teach queer sexuality as a part of sex education. Like, yeah.
I don't think it is there. Although even like mandated sex ed in many states is actually just abstinence education.
Yeah.
Still, surprise.
And we
right?
all have seen how that works.
Okay, so I would love to know about a book that changed your life. What's the book you read as a teenager that sort of, you know, as you think about when you were thinking about creating these books, was a kind of inspiration? Anything like that?
I can definitely come up with some. I'm quite a reader, as I talk about in my book, and I mentioned many books that I loved in this one. And definitely one is the Alana series by Tamora Pierce, which are middle grade fantasy novels. Song of the Lioness. The first book in the series is about a girl who has a twin brother, and they are supposed to both go off to sort of start their educations, and she's supposed to go to like a nunnery, I think, and like learn magic, and he's supposed to train to be a knight, and neither of the siblings like the idea of this future, so they switch places. She disguises herself as a boy and trains to be a knight because she loves physical activity, and she's very competitive, and she's a very like fiery spirit and all of this. And I was like very drawn to this character who was seemingly like living in a different gendered experience, but also it's the first book I can ever remember reading where a character gets their period and is very not excited about it, and like is like, ugh, what is this? This sucks. But also gets like some pretty good advice from like an older female mentor who says like, you know, like it's gonna come, you know, once a month, and you're probably gonna have some cramps, and like you might want to take some pain medicine, and you should like, you know, bathe regularly, and like here's how you don't get pregnant. And it's like really basic. It's like, it's very small. Like, it's not a big scene. It's probably like 2 pages out of like a whole book. But I was like, wow, I've like never seen a character, specifically in a fantasy novel, like have this explained to them. And like the advice that was given was like generally good. And so like that meant a lot to me too, where I was like, this is a character who seems like they're having a really similar like gender experience as I am, and also having cool adventures, and like it's like a magical sword and a talking cat, and like, you know, it's like other cool stuff. So yeah, that book I would say was like the one as a teen that I was like, ooh, I relate to this. And then when I was in my 20s, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel came out. That book had a huge impact on me, and as it had many of us. And that's probably the one book that most influenced genderqueer when I was writing it. Yeah.
I was not really a strong reader when I was a kid, and I read a lot of trade comics though. So I was a very huge X-Men fan. You know, X-Men's very queer coded in a lot of ways, which I didn't even think about till I was older. And you know, it's like, oh, I've got these special powers, and I try to do good even though everyone hates me. And you know, so
now.
Your characters are yeah, I know. I'm like, I can't believe I'm living to see this. It's amazing.
Canon, you guys. It's amazing.
Look,
we won.
Yeah. We won. Come to this adamantium. Okay. What was I gonna say?
So you related to X-Men characters.
I did
you
relate
felt
to
like
X-Men.
they're also like they're like a minority in the population. They're stigmatized.
Yes.
It like comes on at puberty. Like they then like it's a secret. They're closeted. It's very
very that.
Yes.
And then like as I got older, there were like other books that was like wow, like also Fun Home by Alison Bechdel for me was like like I put that down. I was like, oh, I need like a nap for like 10 days. And then American Born Chinese by Jean Long Yang was like, I was like really moved because I was like, wow, I don't remember really reading a story as a kid about the Asian American experience like this. And even though I'm not Chinese, there's still like this common thread that's like, oh, I get it though. Like I really get this character, and you know, and I was lucky to have people like Adrian Tomian, like sorry if I'm saying his last name wrong, I'm not sure, who also like had like you know adult Asian representation in comics, which was very powerful to me, and then people like oh my god, I forget his first name now. David Small, Stitches, right? Like that kind of powerful, like storytelling, like using memoir, right, to like really get into the thick of it. So like all those things like really had a lot of influence on this book, and all the nerdy things that I love too. Like you know, there is like X-Men references in here, and there's like Lord of the Rings stuff, even though like I didn't read all of the books. I watched the movies, and that's the truth. But still nerd out about it.
You still can.
Yeah, I know. I've tried. I know. Shame.
Though I think in one part of Texas now you can't read The Hobbit before 6th grade.
My God.
So.
Like, what is this? This is insane. What's that?
It's just a polycule of dwarves. That's why I don't let you do it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Huh.
Cathy, any books that
I mean, I had the same experience with Song of the Lioness. I don't really have a good answer for this.
No, all right. That's
I just don't want to waste our time.
all right, so you're working on new projects. What are your new projects? And I'm curious to ask, like, do you have a moment when you're working on stuff now where the reception of your last, of these books is in your head?
Yeah, the book I'm working on next is for middle grade readers, but it definitely touches on a lot of really similar topics. It's once again about a character questioning gender and sexuality and identity, but who is in junior high. But there is a sex ed scene where there are like diagrams of reproductive organs like on a board, and a teacher kind of like giving a really very basic explanation. And there's like one glimpse of menstrual blood and that kind of thing. And definitely one of the questions when I was pitching the book, I asked editors, like, will I be asked to remove these scenes? Like, are publishers going to say, like, we don't want this in here because the book might be challenged? But fortunately, every editor that I talked to was like, absolutely not. We will not ask you to remove any of that. And a couple of them even said, we'd actually like a little bit more, maybe. Could you actually develop that scene further? And I was like, okay, that's really good to hear. But yeah, I wrote almost all of my second book before the challenges started. I had it like 90% written by the time the challenges began. So I'm really glad that that book was not written sort of under the shadow of all of this. But I can only assume it will be challenged in at least a couple of places because it still hits on those queer themes, even though it's more like Cathy's book where it is like, yeah, it's like junior high, it's like 11 and 12-year-olds. There isn't even a kiss, but there is questions about sexuality. A character being like, I don't know yet what I am, but I think I'm in the queer umbrella somewhere. So it'll probably get banned.
People just make it up, so it doesn't really matter.
That's
whether
true.
it has or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm serious.
Yeah.
They just make it up.
Yeah. What's your next project?
It's an older YA book titled Charger County. It's about 4 girls who want to film an action movie. It's about like drama club. It's older YA, so it sort of deals with more like violence, like sort of the everyday violence of toxic masculinity. So it is specifically for an older audience. But yeah, drawing that now, 2025 probably.
Yes, me too, probably. We'll see. And you're working on 2 projects simultaneously.
Two, somehow.
Look at you. You're asking the question.
I'm not one for this world. I'm working on my first adult graphic novel, which is called Gaysians, and it's all about like gay Asian American experience. And I'm working on also a middle grade graphic novel, which hasn't been announced yet, so stay tuned.
Okay. It's so great. Like when I made this book, I had a trans character in it, and I was like, oh, I'll just put a trans character in this. And it was like, oh, there isn't a middle school graphic novel with a trans. Like I was like the first one. I don't know if that's actually true.
But you were like, early. No, even if it wasn't number 1, it was probably within the first like 5 or so.
I was like, oh, I didn't know I was doing something here. I was just making a book.
And what year was that up?
2019.
19.
Yeah.
A little.
I mean, it was that October 2021 that guy made the list, and he's just distracting from all the other fascist things that they're trying to do. This is all a distraction.
Yeah, total fascist.
I mean, I'm serious.
No, yeah, because like, I mean, sort of in the doom and gloom opening segment, you're talking about, ultimate agendas. Like, ultimate agenda is they want to defund all libraries and destroy public education. Like, that's the ultimate goal of book banning. It is totally fascism. There's no question about it. And, like, we can make jokes about it and make light about it a little bit, but it's kind of because if we don't laugh, we are going to scream. Like,
but isn't it just parents' rights? What do you think about that? What do you say to that?
I say, again,
it's
it's like you are allowed to make choices about your own child. You are not allowed to make choices about everyone else's child.
Are you? I mean, how far does that go?
I know it's a good question though, because if you're like a really conservative parent and you're like oppressing your queer child, part of me goes like, maybe you're not allowed to make choices about your own child. But like, I legally can't get in there. Like, that's not my zone place to say. But yeah, specifically what you can't do is ban something for everyone else in your community.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of talk about parent rights. What about student rights?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. Like, the youth are they're never acknowledged as human beings with their own, rights.
Yeah, agency, and also understanding about their own selves and what they need and what they want and what their limits are. And like, I remember as a young person, I picked up a teen book that had some like partying and some like probably sexual themes when I was a little too young for it. And I literally like got to a scene that made me uncomfortable, closed the book, and returned it to the library because I was like, I don't want to read that. Like, and I, as a 12 or 13-year-old, like made that decision on my own. I was like, I am not ready for this material and it's making me uncomfortable, so I'm gonna walk away from it.
I mean, I'm very curious.
Kids are smart.
If I can make a list of all of the, like, cis, white, heterosexual books that I find extremely offensive and try to get those banned. Can I do that? I find that very offensive. Very offensive.
This is the thing is, like, some people are trying to sort of turn it back. Like, someone in Utah is trying to ban the Bible under the exact rules that were passed to ban queer books.
And in Utah, Utah in particular,
Mormon land.
Utah, they've got they're very, very creative with the ways that they're like rewriting and changing laws. So in Utah, they didn't actually change any of the laws. They just took like existing criminal offenses about indecent material, and then they told schools they told schools 2 things. First, they said, we have these rules, but students have First Amendment rights. That was in May. That was the Attorney General memo in May. And they went, okay. And then in June, the Attorney General released a second memo that said, students have rights, but if we find any of these books in your schools, you're all going to get in big trouble. So what's the deal there is that behind the scenes, one memo, both are technically written by the Attorney General, but it's very clear that the second one was the Attorney General saying, whoever wrote the first one for me didn't go far enough, so we want to do this. And then after that, it's triggered this kind of like school level review of all these books. And what they've done is they said basically, if the book has a certain kind of sexual content, then it counts as pornography, and therefore it has no literary value to minors. So it's this very strange way, and then when you look at the list of books, it's like Looking for Alaska by John Green, The Handmaid's Tale, The Bluest Eye. All these books are porn. They're literally being determined to be porn in schools in Utah. And so that's a situation where somebody said, okay, well, if you're going to get all that, well, I've got this other book for you that's got all that and more. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. and it's always the Bible. But I always fear it's not just the Bible, right? Like as you said,
Right.
there is so much you could be offended by
Yeah.
in literature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you say to the book banners if they were listening? What's your message?
I mean, just like read it. Read the book. Step one. So many of them have not read any of the books they're trying to challenge. So they should definitely have to read it and maybe write like a very detailed book review before they're allowed to put a challenge forward.
Yes.
That's step one. And then step two, if they have any like willingness to listen or empathy, is just like understand that a book that may not seem valuable or interesting to you might be very valuable and interesting to someone else, because we are all different people and we all have different needs and we all have different questions and we're all coming from a different place of experience. And like, yeah, I have loved and really deeply related to books that other people might be like, whatever, it was meh, and like we need a diversity of stories because we have a diversity of readers, and removing books from a library impoverishes an entire community, and also it's like the readers who are already marginalized who become further marginalized when books are removed. So I don't think they would listen to that, but that is what I would say.
Cathy, what do you want to say to the book banners? They're all ears.
I mean, your shirt is already
I
saying
know.
a lot.
I mean, I feel like it's hard to be like, because I feel like even like acknowledging and talking directly to book banners, you're sort of
You're
on
validating
a
their
different level.
argument, yeah.
You're validating it in a
Yeah.
certain level, right? I mean, it's a participation in fascism. It's a participation in white supremacy and trying to push this ideology. So I would rather we keep fighting to make sure that these anti-trans bills don't pass. I would prefer we keep fighting to make sure that Black Lives Matter. Like, I prefer that we...
Like, yeah, because
I don't
like,
want to say I don't care, but I'm fine.
yeah, like,
like my book being banned, I'm fine.
Isn't it a bestseller now? That's what they say. Books get banned, and
That's news to me.
Yeah.
It definitely, I do think that arguing with someone who is just never going to agree with you and is making no statements in good faith is a waste of time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the challenges are actually also designed to waste people's time. Like, they're wasting our time when we have to respond to things on, in a day we spend doing interviews and answering emails when we could have been writing instead, and writing, the queerest book we've yet uncovered.
The wokest trash you've ever seen.
Yes, exactly. And and also, like, when I think about the amount of like human effort hours of like librarians and teachers and school boards that have already had to go in to fight to just keep books that were already on the shelves to remain on the shelves, it's deeply frustrating to me. It's the same thing how I feel about like the abortion laws being repealed. I'm like, we had rights and now we have less, and we have to fight to even try to maintain what we already previously had. And it's just so frustrating that it doesn't feel like we can make any progress when we're just constantly fighting to just hold like a basic line of like rights. So it's very, very annoying to me how much it's how much we have to fight to just keep on like the status quo. Well, what we actually need is like progress. So yeah, I also am not very interested in talking to people who are trying to ban books directly, because I'm just like, they won't agree with me and I don't agree with them, and I'd rather be writing a gay book right now.
Okay, to jump off, I have a few things.
Yeah.
Like, to jump off of your point of like how much money and man hours is going into all this. So I just saw a report that came out recently. Someone went to the trouble of figuring out how much it costs to ban a book.
Oh.
It came out to $30,000 for
Frederick
this.
Joseph,
Thank
the
you.
black friend in Texas.
Yes.
Thank you. And it's like, think about that. You're complaining about my $18.99 book, like wastes of taxpayer money. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're wasting the taxpayers' money. So there's that. And also it's like, can you list like the other things, the other issues in your community that aren't being addressed by your government right now?
Yeah.
Like, you don't think this is a bit of
And
a
like
red
what you
herring
could have
here?
done with like donating that
Yeah.
$30,000 to like a food bank or something.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's, especially with my book, I'm just like, I don't have the stats on me right now. You can go to the Trevor Project and find all the stats there. But, I can count on my fingers how many children took their lives during your stupid fucking PTA meeting. And you're concerned about my book. You really don't care about children's lives, right? Like, you're really not like in the street screaming like, oh my God, someone like actually save our children. You're not like concerned about the mass shootings going on like every other day in like schools across the country. Like you're worried about
No, they have to protect them from
this.
drag.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
because drag
specifically,
queens are
if you wanted to improve, like, specifically the quality of students, and you as an educator, I'm sure would know this, is like, maybe let's increase teacher salaries. Let's increase, like, budgets for, like, the arts and sports and music and humanities. Maybe let's build up our free school lunch program. Like, what about increasing our, like, busing system? Like, there are so many things that could be done to improve, like, students' days. And removing books in the library is, like, not on the list.
Yeah, I think what I would say to book banners is that you're allowing them to distract you with this site.
yeah.
They're distracting us and they're distracting you
Yeah.
from things that would directly help your family, that would directly help your neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's our
all
books
distraction.
today, and it's
There'll be another book
something
tomorrow.
else you care about tomorrow.
And I always think it's like in so many places, you know, your books and others, it's like that one book that would have saved a kid's life, you know, that means so much to that one kid, but, you know, instead of that child, we're thinking about like the one parent instead. And all the other parents who don't actually care one way or the other, you know, and have other things that they're focused on, but we just sort of keep defaulting to the person who hates something or
And is really loud.
or has like, you know, was very loud and has a very particular idea of the world, and they sort of just keep winning over everybody else. And so we need to continue to stand up for them. So, well, please join me in a round of applause for our